Rookie drafts are underway. Yes, we have ADP, but some guys are going early, some guys are falling, and some guys' ADP just feels totally out of whack. We're going to dive into 5 players who are polarizing, and their ADP just doesn't add up. Stick around. Hello, and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. Yes, we are going to talk some polarizing players in terms of ADP, but of course I'm joined by a fantastic guest, Jeff Bell. You'll probably know him on Twitter at For Whom the J Bell Tolls, Dynasty Captain at Football Guys, host of the Devi Royale. Jeff, how you doing?
Fantastic, Rich. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation. I know you reached out a couple months ago, and I pushed you off because of being busy for my day job. But no, I'm thrilled that we were able to be here today, and now we have landing spots, and now we have some more information that we can talk off of. And now you're exactly right. We have ADP to even talk off of.
Absolutely. One of the brightest minds, one of my favorite guests they got on every year. So really appreciate you coming on, Jeff. We're going to dive straight in. So we are talking polarizing players, and let's start at the top. Drake Maye. I don't know about you, Jeff. I've done plenty of rookie drafts now, and I've seen Drake Maye go number 2 overall. I've seen him fall to number 9 in some Superflex drafts. Have you seen the same? And what is it that you think that's making this huge range of draft positions for Drake Maye?
I think the biggest thing is that we never had any consensus established before rookie drafts is a big part of it. And so really I think the top 8 has kind of been, and it's really kind of been top 7. Then JJ McCarthy kind of worked his way in there because of especially the landing spot with the Vikings. But I think that having that top 8, and really kind of once you get outside of the top 2, having Caleb Williams and having Marvin Harrison at the tippy top, you have a lot of comfort on where guys are going to go, and you have a lot more consideration about roster builds and about needs. And I think that that's the big driver. And then obviously with Maye landing in the spot that people are concerned about, given the lack of development for Mac Jones, really kind of the questions around that New England infrastructure and what's going to happen there.
Yeah, I want to hesitate slightly on the landing spot, because every person I talk to and have any communication with seems to slate the Patriots landing spot. It's a bad landing spot. Look what they did to Mac Jones over the past 2 years. And I just kind of want to put pause on that and say, this is a different regime. I know that it's, Jared Mayer was the kind of head coach in waiting, but we've got a different play caller. We've got a different offensive line coach. The offensive line is similar, but is slightly improved. Yes, there's no true superstar number 1 receiver, but Demario Douglas flashed last year. Kendrick Bourne, okay, maybe I'm the one remaining Kendrick Bourne stan, but is a competent NFL receiver. Hunter Henry is a above average NFL tight end. And I'm really excited about Jalen Polk and Javon Baker. And I think that, yes, it's lacking a true number 1, but this isn't an awful landing spot. I think we've seen rookie quarterbacks land in worse situations, and just having that kind of short-term memory of they ruined Mac Jones, so they're going to ruin Drake Maye. Let's not forget they ruined Mac Jones because they gave him a defensive coordinator and a special teams coordinator as 2 offensive play callers. Like, I feel like this landing spot is better than consensus. Are you with me on that, Jeff, or do you think that this is a terrible landing spot?
No, I do agree with you. I think that the talk on it has been far, far too harsh. And we just see things change, especially year to year. You see things change so dramatically. And a little bit in the Devi space, you're looking at a player like Luther Burden or Tentora McMillan coming into next year's class who could be those true number 1 receivers. Or the other thing that we've seen with top receivers is kind of force their way into situations. And so I think that when you look at the Patriots, they seem they're going to be very, very patient with Drake Maye. My expectation, I think we're going to see some Jacoby Brissett through maybe the beginning of the year, first half of the year or so, and then be patient with Maye. I think they recognize the development that needs to happen. When you talk about those other weapons, I think it stacks up well in terms of you can find out what you've got this year, but then when you put that number 1 piece there, that's when things really take off and flourish. And I made a comparison. I just did a show today with Andrew Cooper on the Football Guys Dynasty show, and we talked about how the Giants, so they had Wan'Dale Robinson, they had Jalen Hyatt, and those are players that people didn't like in a vacuum. But then when you add Malik Neighbors into that room, it makes so much more sense and it allows players to play in their natural positions. And so I think that's when you're looking at where the Patriots are in their team building cycle. I do expect they're going to add a number one receiver at some point. And so if that's your hesitation, then I'm comfortable there. I think it's funny anytime to just say, well, they haven't had a number one receiver since then, and so they can't possibly have another one. And we don't know what Jalen Polk might be. Maybe Jalen Polk is that type of player.
Yeah, and I think that they have shown us that they realize that they need a number one receiver. Look at the amount of money they were willing to throw at someone like Calvin Ridley. I wouldn't be shocked if we didn't see them throw a whole load of money at T. Higgins when he breaks free at the end of the year. There's going to be options, and I think that they realize that they need to bring a weapon in around Drake Maye. So yeah, I think his ADP is low. I'm scooping up above that ADP, but for him to be falling to 8 or 9 in Superflex drafts is absolute crazy to me. And I'm trading up every time I see that. Before we move on to the next player. Before we move on to the next player, though, sorry, go on.
It just reminds me of maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor situation where nobody in their right mind would have put JJ McCarthy above Drake Maye a week before the draft. Now everybody just is going to fade him, and it's kind of very similar to that type of situation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point there. Before we move on to the next guy, though, we have got our Scott Fishbowl 14 giveaway. If you hit subscribe, send us a screenshot of that. And if you sign up and donate to the JTT Cup, you get a second entry. We will be giving it away live on Sunday's live stream, where we've got a special guest to talk through some of the other fantastic charity leagues out there you can get involved in. The next guy I want to talk about is going ahead of Drake Maye in ADP. This is all ADP that I've pulled from real live drafts off MFL. Brock Bowers, he's clearly the tight end one, but for me, Jeff, 5th overall, he's a little bit expensive. I've seen him go as high as 3. I've also seen him fall to that back end of the first round. Where are you comfortable taking Brock Bowers?
I think I've got ranked 7th, I believe, last time I did my rookie ranks, but it's kind of that 7/8 range. I think it was probably the ideal spot. I know my home league, I got him at the 110 and I couldn't believe it, but I did a bunch of safe leagues and I had a bunch of 106s in those drafts, and that's what I most frequently took Bowers. That's 2 tight end premium, so 2 points for tight end reception. So I was grabbing him all over there. So that kind of gives you the range of where I'm comfortable at or where I'm thrilled at, but I do believe in Bowers. I think that you probably slightly push a Dunze above, and then I do have Drake Maye above him.
Yeah, I love Bowers. I think he's phenomenal. I think he's an incredible prospect. This is a guy that had led Georgia in receptions every single year of his career. That's an offense that had A.D. Mitchell, that had Lav McConkey in it at times over the past 3 years. I think he's phenomenal and probably one of the best prospects we've seen at the tight end position ever.
Yeah, but
I feel like if you're drafting him in the top 6, you're almost drafting him to be the tight end 1 in Dynasty. The positional value isn't there to warrant the draft capital that you're having to give up and giving up on one of those elite receivers or the quarterback position. So yeah, I feel like I've become a Bowers hater because of where he's going in ADP, but I love the prospect. I just don't love the price, if that makes sense. And some of the places I've seen him going in drafts feels astronomical.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about the landscape that we drafted Kyle Pitts into just a couple years ago, we were just so starved, so desperate for a young tight end that could be the tight end 1. Now you've got Kyle Pitts. Now you've got all the Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, all the players that came in last year. And so you're putting, Trey McBride, the breakout last year, putting Brock Bowers into that situation. You just don't have the desperation for a potential tight end 1 like we did even just 2 to 3 years ago. And so I think that it just changes the landscape a little bit. You look at the uncertainty around the Raiders quarterback situation, but at the same time, I'm encouraged at the Raiders landing spot because I know they have Michael Mayer to do a lot of that inline dirty work for a tight end, and that'll free Bowers up to be an actual, the slot receiver, an actual weapon within that offense. And the time frame on Devontae Adams, how much prime does Devontae Adams have left? There's been rumblings he wanted to be out of the Raiders. So that's another situation, very much like New England, that it looks like now, well, it's crowded. They don't have a quarterback, but those, if Devontae Adams were to leave and Brock Bowers is their number 1 target and they get some level of competency at the quarterback position, yeah, you can realize that value.
Yeah, it feels like for me, Brock Bowers is a player that I'm probably going to be targeting as a buy mid to end of the season, because I think
Yeah.
given that quarterback situation, just given the sheer target volume, Devontae Adams is going to command a huge amount of targets. Jacoby Myers is an above average wide receiver too. And as you said, there's Michael Mayer. And I just don't know if there's going to be enough targets for Brock Bowers to build, kind of pay off the hype at the early part of the season. And I think as soon as that happens, people are going to go, oh no, Kyle Pitts 2.0. And that's when I'm looking to pounce, and hopefully there'll be a slight value drop. It may be wrong. He may come out and be an absolute superstar from day one, but that's when I'm looking to pounce, certainly back in the year, hopefully when the prices drop slightly.
I think the biggest thing there is it's softened that top 8 tier. And so you can actually kind of trade into it now. Whereas before people were just prohibitive about trading out of there. I think that it's opened that up a little bit. Yeah,
absolutely. And we talked about that top 8 tier. Outside of those top 8, it kind of feels like there's a tier of maybe 3 or 4 wide receivers that kind of round out that first round. Brian Thomas is one of those. Coming into the draft, I kind of felt like I was going to be the one that wasn't a Brian Thomas fan. I kind of felt he was a bit of a one-trick pony. I thought his ceiling was potentially higher than any other wide receiver in this draft. Like, there is a range of outcomes where he is phenomenal, but I thought he was a boom-bust type prospect. There was some risk there. But again, I see him falling into the second round. I love the landing spot with the Jaguars. Is he someone that you're comfortable taking ahead of the likes of Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman, Lab McConkey, or are you putting him at the back of that kind of second tier wide receivers?
No, I think he's above those players in my book. I think that when you look, there was a little bit of separation where they fell in the draft, but I think you're exactly right that Jaguars landing spot is very exciting because they're really looking for a big-bodied X that can maybe run some slants, that could be a volume eater. And so, and having Gabe Davis, we know Gabe Davis, they've given a decent amount of money to Gabe Davis, but we know what we've got there. You've got an outside player that's going to be stretching the field vertically, involved in the run game. And so that's where I think that had you seen Thomas fall into a situation desperate for a field stretcher, and maybe he gets pigeonholed into that type of role, that's where I would have some hesitation. But when I look at the Jaguars offense, it's almost the opposite. It's an offense that's desperate for a player that can work into either all 3 levels, and especially the intermediate range there. We've seen the comfort level that Trevor Lawrence had with big body receivers when he was at Clemson. And so pairing them there and really not having another receiver of that profile on that offense, I think is an exciting landing spot.
Yeah, and I think if you're shooting purely for upside, I think Brian Thomas has got to be the guy you're going for.
Yeah.
As I said, there is a range of outcomes where he's a top 12 wide receiver. There's a range of outcomes where he's an absolute fantasy superstar, and pairing with Trevor Lawrence, he fits quite nicely. As you said, Trevor Lawrence had great success at Clemson with some of those big-bodied outside receivers. So I think it's a natural fit there, and it could be absolute dynamite. But you need to understand you could also be lighting that pick on fire, and it could be nothing over the next 2 years, because Brian Thomas is that type of prospect. The fourth guy we're going to talk about, though, I think he is, for me, the single most polarizing rookie in all rookie drafts. Michael Penix. I talked about him immediately after rookie draft. I think he's a great player to look at, not as a 2024 second round pick, but think of him as a 2026 first round pick. How many dynasty managers would comfortably trade a 2024 early to mid second round pick for a 26 first? I think most would. Well, that's how you got to view Michael Penix, because yes, he's probably going to sit behind Kirk Cousins for the next 2 years, but the Falcons drafted him with the 8th overall pick. They're going to use him. And in 2026, he's going to be worth a first round pick, because he's going to be a starting rookie quarterback tied in a good landing spot with good weapons. And I think there's real fancy potential there. Are you with me in that thinking, Jeff? Or do you think that waiting 2 years for any potential kind of top 16, 18 draft pick is too long to wait?
First, I want to ask you a question. In your mind, with no Kirk Cousins at all, where do you think Penix will land in Superflex drafts?
I think he'd be going in the JJ McCarthy tier. I think he'd probably be QB4, QB5, probably top 7, 8 in most drafts. Yeah.
I think you'd be pushing that 105 conversation potentially if you're kind of looking at that tier. And so that's my thing. I love it. I love that you can get the discount on him. I mean, we've talked before, but you'd look at the Debbie landscape, like there's no exciting quarterbacks the next 2 years. And I kind of had a joke for a little while ago on Twitter where I said the 2026 Debbie rankings, and I had Michael Penix as quarterback 1 in the 2026 Debbie rankings, because I think you're exactly right. And the other thing too, I think the initial reaction was that he would be sitting for 4 years. I think people have kind of realized that Kirk Cousins has an out in the second year of that contract. It sets up well for that, but we don't know what Cousins is or is going to be coming off that Achilles. And we don't know that Penix doesn't see a situation where he can play right away, or he gets on the field and it shows up that he's ready to play right away. And I think that if that happens, it's one of those things that the genie's out of the bottle. It's going to be hard to put it back in. And so I think you have a real scenario where the end of the year, or if Cousins gets hurt again or doesn't recover the way that you would like to, you might have Penix on the field this year. And so you're immediately realizing that value. It's so interesting because I've seen people say that you can't use an early second or a mid second on him. And like, you're talking about dart throw, like Xavier Legette or Michael Penix, who could be a super flex staple for the next however long. And he's in a great system, landing with Drake London, landing with Kyle Pitts, landing with Bijan Robinson. You couldn't really ask for more in skill talent. So I love Penix. And it's funny to me, he's a player that gained value, seeing him go 8th overall, seeing that value on them landing somewhere with skill position players, that's not going to be a question moving forward, relative to kind of walking in and seeing what we saw like last year with Will Levis falling out of the first round, with the great tumble of Malik Willis, not having that concern, having that comfort of him being a top 10 pick. It increases the value, because in my mind, I struggled to separate what had happened to those players with some of the things that I had heard about Penix pre-draft.
Yeah, I mean, I was a huge fan of Penix pre-draft. I was the one banging the table saying he's going first round. He's going first round.
Yeah.
In no world did I think he was going to go top 10.
Yeah,
I was completely gobsmacked by that. But to me, that just shows what NFL teams are thinking about him. And I think the other hit that I keep hearing on him is, oh, but he's going to be 27 before he's a starting quarterback. Okay, fine. So that means I'm going to get 10 years out of him as probably a fantasy relevant player. How many players on your roster right now are you looking at for 10 years? Like, all I care about is the next 3, 5, maybe 6 years at the quarterback position. I'm not caring about what a guy's going to do for me in 7, 8, 9, even 10 years. That's absolutely ridiculous to be using age on a rookie as a reason not to draft him. So, yeah, I think that Michael Penix ADP is way too low, and I love scooping him up in that kind of early second round range, definitely. The next guy I want to talk about, it feels like I'm so much higher than consensus on. So I was keen to get your thoughts. Malachi Corley, he's my wide receiver 8. I'm happy taking him at the kind of early to mid part of the second round. I saw him go in a DLF actual league at 402 today, and I was trying to trade up for about 10 picks and couldn't get him. Are you more leaning towards the DLF guys in terms of his ADP should be lower than this? Are you with me in that he should be going higher, or do you think he's going in the right range? It feels like he has got such a wide range of outcomes in terms of where he's going in rookie drafts.
I think that usually when I see drafts kind of work out, it seems to be that like that 302, 303 pick where I feel like there's a real considerable fall off relative to kind of what you can get at maybe the 208 or so. And Corley's like right on the bubble of that tier for me. I think it's a more fun real football situation than I'm a little bit skeptical about what the fantasy usage is going to look like, because I do think he's pretty limited. If he shows that ability to win downfield more consistently and is able to grow into a bigger role, then yeah, I would be more excited there. But if it's going to be a player that anytime, I'm of the belief that anytime you're talking about him working with the running backs or like those types of things, I think some people see it as, well, they're figuring out more ways to get in the ball. And I see it as they're needing to figure out more ways to get in the ball, because he's not, if you've got a wide receiver, you don't make him a running back. And so that's kind of my questions and concerns. I think there are some things that what Nathaniel Hackett and what Aaron Rodgers did with Randall Cobb, with Devontae Adams a bit in the RPO, the screen action, that could fit Corley pretty well. It's just, does that push him into being a potential wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 on your dynasty rosters.
Yeah, I think he lacks the elite ceiling of some of those more boom bust prospects in this sort of range in the draft. But I think if you're looking for a kind of a solid double rather than a home run, I think he's got that potential. I think, look, Mike Williams is on a 1-year deal. We know the injury track record over the last 3-4 years of Mike Williams. I think if you're banking on him playing 17 games, I've got some swamp land in Florida that I'd like to sell you. And I think outside of, Garrett Wilson, there's no real established targets in this Jets offense. The tight end room, maybe Jeremy Ruckert carves out a role. Maybe Tyler Conklin continues to be solid, but I'm not excited about either of those. There's no other, Xavier Gibson and Brownlee and that kind of stuff. I'm not excited about those. So I just feel like there's a world where Malachi Corley could be that real nice compliment to Garrett Wilson, almost a bit completely different players, but I see it almost like the Mike Evans, Chris Godwin world, where Mike Evans is going to be your target leader. He's going to be the one that you're going to run the offense through. But Chris Godwin, under Bruce Arians, was getting that 3-4 kind of manufactured touches, whether that be on screens or jet sweeps and things like that, that just gave him a nice, solid fantasy floor. That then if you get 4 or 5 targets in the receiving game on top of that, you can then almost carve into some competent fantasy relevance. I think if you're hoping that, as you said, he becomes a wide receiver 1, 2 for your fantasy team, probably not. But as a flex play that you could play most weeks, if you're getting him in the 3rd round, I think he's worth a dart throw for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the talent is there. I usually kind of lean more towards like a Ray Davis in that type of range, or like I like to kind of take a running back in that type of range, like a Will Shipley type player is where I kind of end up relative there, because I question long term if he would actually be the number 2 target in the Jets offense, and having Mike Williams there right now, it seems to me that he's a kind of a good 2.5. On a team. And I think that if he's going to be like the 2.5, are you still going to be looking for a 2 or even a 1.5 to kind of complement Garrett Wilson long term?
Yeah, and I guess to kind of build off that point as well, if we're looking long term, Aaron Rodgers is around for this year, maybe next year, and then the Jets haven't exactly had a good history of drafting and building quarterbacks. So I'm not really sure what we could expect.
Well, but I do think I think he's an interesting to grab him in the 3rd. And we know how reactive the dynasty community can be and how things, because he's the type of player that can put some highlights out there. And so that's where it's like you grab him in the 3rd and then there's a highlight of him trucking it at somebody or something like that. And then all of a sudden you've got a 25-second that you use the 3rd on.
Yeah, absolutely. And to off your point earlier around those kind of volume-based positions of running backs, to me, Corley's the cutoff. After Corley, that's when I'm going volume-based positions, running backs, quarterbacks who are 1 injury away from a reliable workload that can kind of cover stuff out. So yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that's it. 5 guys. We rattled through their ADP, 5 polarizing players. Jeff, remind everybody that is watching this, where can they find you? Where can they find your work?
Yeah, Football Guys. So I'm really involved over at Football Guys, Dynasty Captain over at Football Guys, the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show with myself and Jagger Maye. We've been kind of rotating some guests through. We had an episode with Dave Kluge that just kind of came up, and then Andrew Cooper, we met with him today, and so that one will be coming out probably by the time you see this video. So we got a lot of exciting things happening with there, but that's going to be where you find the most of my work, and then on Twitter at For Whom J Bell Tolls. But that's really kind of just jokes, and I don't really put as much fantasy football stuff on Twitter as I used to. So
awesome. Well, thank you ever so much for coming on. Always appreciate you taking the time to join us. If you haven't hit that thumbs up button or that subscribe, go ahead and do it now, and make sure you're back here on Sunday for our live stream. We'll be giving away that Scott Fishbowl spot on the live stream.